Hi, I'm Mike Manley, editor of Draw Magazine, and welcome to the Right Now Draw Magazine crossover, How to Create Comics from Script to Print. I sat down with Danny Fingeroth, editor of Right Now Magazine, writer and co-creator of Thief of Time, to ask him to provide us some information regarding the writing process in general, as well as some nuts and bolts specifics for our comic book, Thief of Time.
So let's talk a little bit about how a story is written in a comic. There are the rules of structure apply no matter what style you're using. Human beings generally respond, especially in genre stories, to what's called a three-act structure. Three-act structure is another way of saying beginning, middle, end. Things start out okay, then they get bad, then they get worse, then they get really bad, then they resolve themselves. An old colleague of mine used to use Little Miss Muffet's sat on a tuffet as a way of remembering how a story is structured. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet. You've established your setting and your character, eating her curds and whey. You've established the action and the status quo of what she normally does. Along came a spider. You've introduced the conflict and the antagonist and sat down beside her. You've heightened the conflict and frightened Miss Muffet. That's the climax of the action. And also the heightening of the crisis, and away, which is the even next greater level of suspense and climax along with the denouement. Traditionally, comics were written in the full script style. In other words, the writer will describe every single panel and then will also write out the caption, sound effects, so that when the artist gets it, he or she has everything in front of them. With Marvel style, it's more of a collaborative situation where the writer will write more of a story synopsis, probably broken down into pages, or at least chunks of pages. This happens on the first pages 1 through 3, then pages 4 through 6, and it will describe, again, depending on the relationship between the artist and the writer, in more or less detail what goes on. But it's left up to the artist to break it down into panels and to do a lot of the pacing. Because the artist can come up with ways of looking at your stuff that is pleasantly surprising. You have another creative input. And, people bad rap Marvel style because, the writer lets the artist do his job. No, not at all. What you have is a real partner, and you're able to then play to his strengths. You see what's been drawn, and then you can go and be inspired for your copy, for your captions and balloons. And when it works at its peak, you got Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. You always want to end a page with a page turner. You don't want to give anybody any reason to go, I don't care about that. Right. You want something, from the old reliable you.
And then the next page,
it's, oh, hi, Mom. Whatever.
Right. right.
I thought you went to the store. But
right.
You always want to keep things surprising and moving. How do you have dialogue that sounds authentic even though it's a construction? And I think a good thing to do is to listen to people talk everywhere you go. If you're on the bus.
Do you write down interesting bits of dialogue that you hear?
I do that, yeah. I try to remember.
Or a certain way somebody phrases something?
Exactly, yeah. So really keep a notebook and just take down phrases.
Do you ever read your dialogue out loud to see how it sounds?
Occasionally. I know there are people who do that. Listen to dialect and accents, but don't get too cute with them in comics, because again, you don't want to do anything that takes your reader out of the story, that makes your reader have to sound out every word because you've tried to exactly recreate a dialogue of a certain part of Europe or something. In all media, but especially in a comic where your space is so limited, you need to establish character, impart information, and keep the story moving. So dialogue has all those functions that it has to serve simultaneously. So that's the trickiest thing, but just listen a lot and then kind of process it and condense it and try to figure out what the most essential thing your character needs to accomplish and needs to say. But train yourself in creating the illusion of real dialogue. Well, with the writer, I mean, everybody's process is different. I find that it definitely helps me to be sitting at a desk and working on a legal pad and jotting down notes, then to move to the computer and tell the events of a story as a list, which then breaks down into scenes, which then break down into pages. A writer, an artist, a creative person in general is always working. I know Chuck Dixon, when he was interviewed for Right Now, talks about how he spends very little time actually at the keyboard, but he's working 24/7 in his head, thinking of characters, ideas, stories, dialogue, directions. The bottom line is, at the end of the week, do you have a substantial number of pages done? And I think you have to set a goal for yourself and aim for it. The core of the story is your characters. From the characters comes the conflict, and from the conflict comes the story. We talked about some devices for structure. As far as what a story is about, it's hard. It's about, generally, somebody wants something and some person or forces doesn't want him or her to get that thing. There's always this question, what's more important, the plot or the conflict or the character? And the answer to that, all of those, is yes, they all are interrelated. So I think you want to have some knowledge of the world you're working in, but what you really want to do is either know your character intimately or discover the character through putting them in difficult situations. That's an important thing relating to dialogue as well. In real life, people rarely say exactly what they mean, and in the best literature, it reflects that kind of an attitude. Only in very simplistic literature will somebody say, I am evil and I do evil for the sake of doing evil. The best comic book and villains, the best villains in any literature are ones who believe they're fighting for a noble cause, that they believe in their comic book, in their movie, they're the hero. Let's talk a little bit about, in more real nuts and bolts terms, how this character in this story came to be.
Right.
We each had different ideas for character we wanted to do. We had some emails. I put something down on paper and sent it to you, a character description.
Right. And then I looked at that. I added my own ideas and thoughts in another email, and I sent that back to you. And then basically,
I think I incorporated your ideas, put them together in kind of a more concrete form, and then based on those, you drew character sketches.
I mean, I think initially what we would do is we would confer via the internet. We would send email, and then we would try to follow up on phone and go back and forth. Once I had your plot or your character description, and then once I started coming up with the sketches, and after Danny sent the character description, one of the first things I did was to sit down and start doing a series of sketches of the character Heather, to try to get an idea of what her costume might look like, to try to figure out where we, where we're on if we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think our basic thought was this is not a spandex super heroine,
right?
But by the same token, she's not dressed in a business suit. She's someone who's got some kind of adventurer costume, something that's distinctively her, and that will give her a look.
She's not Wonder Woman, but she has to be in shape.
She has to be in shape.
And she's not, a bodacious babe either. We weren't really trying to go for that type of character. I mean, she can be attractive, but she just has to be like an athlete. Like I think you said in the description, like not near Olympic level, but somebody who's going to have to be in shape.
Right. Maybe not quite as magical as Lara Croft, but not far from that either.
Right. And I think this is the first series of sketches where I really sort of just start to nail down what the character would really look like. Initially, I was sort of playing around with the pigtail kind of idea, but then I thought, well, if somebody's crawling through a cave or having to fight somebody, a pigtail's not probably very good, although it does give a youthful appearance. And then this was the first sketch where Danny and I sort of agreed on.
Well, I like that it has the look reminiscent of a superhero outfit, but it's not. It's more of a gymnast or a martial artist outfit, but it's got a distinctive look that can be identified as her. And I think that's important if you're creating a character. Maybe she won't wear the exact same outfit every issue. Mike and I really have to discuss that, but something that's identifiable as her for a reader, for a toy manufacturer, God forbid, or anything.
Well, one of the things I try to do when I design a character is to have part of the character be able to distinguish who the character is. So any arm or leg or part of the body will tell you who the character is. And probably the best example of that is Spider-Man. Any part of his body, his costume, you immediately know that it's Spider-Man. And then after that sketch, I came up with this sketch, and this is where we sort of really settled on the idea of what the character might be. We're having sort of the time jumping device built into the corset. I was sort of thinking that, like most characters, like say Batman or an adventurer, you wouldn't always wear exactly the same outfit. If you're going underseas or you're going into a cold environment or a desert environment, you would have maybe different types of attachments with your uniform.
But the motif of the time travel device would be good. It would unify all of them, and probably we do colors that would be in a similar kind of color scheme. Now, of course, based on ideas Mike may have as he's designing her, might give me ideas. Oh, look, Mike put that glove on her. Gee, I'm going to have her have a weapon, a glove that shocks, that sends electric shocks, or maybe that staff has like a pogo stick attachment or something.
Right. This is one of the ways once you start to design a character, can start bringing other ideas. It's like a springboard for other ideas. You start saying, well, she could have this, bionic or exoskeleton in one adventure, and maybe in another one she would, wear an Arctic suit or something.
And again, thinking ahead to, to cartoons or toys, if she has 11 different outfits, then that is things that would be attractive to a media company to want to maybe option a character like that because they know they could do toys or cartoons
Always
or
the
things.
entrepreneur.
I am the entrepreneur. That's right, Mike.
Now once I had gotten the basic designs down, Danny went ahead and wrote the plot.
But the plot, that says here, broken down by page 1, page 2, and I describe with bullet points in this case, which could indicate panels for Mike, but he certainly knows that he's free to mess with that. But it indicates how talking about the rhythm, sort of how many panels might be on a page, how much density of action might be on a page, and gives him a blueprint to then to plug his imagination in. I highlight the story points when earlier today, and then Mike did these thumbnails from which he did pages that he was able to send to me via email.
I would scan in these, and then send these along to Danny as a JPEG. And then what I would do is I would also send a description, like in the case with this page, which has actually been relayed out. But this was my first page for page 1, and my first layout. And as you can see, I did it in the blue pencil, which I was showing you earlier on. Then I scanned this in, and I sent it, and then I sent a description of what happened in each panel so that Danny would know what was going on, because I slightly altered this from what Danny originally had in his plot. But as you'll see in a minute, I'll show you exactly what I ended up using as the final page.
Now, and one reason Mike does these very lightly sketched thumbnails is so that we can hammer out any differences in what we think a page should be before he goes ahead and does a very tight pencil, and before he goes ahead and inks it, obviously. So it's again part of the back and forth process.
So next, I'll spend a little time doodling and sketching and warming up. And I usually do that before I draw. I always take a little time and kind of percolate my brain a little bit. Just sort of free associate and sort of let whatever's going to come into my head come out. So we're going to just spend a little time, sometimes maybe an hour or so. It's just sort of like going to the gym, like warming up, working out a little bit, getting my brain going so that I'll have all my juices flowing and ready to draw some great comics. I just love to start sketching and just sort of see where things go. Sometimes I'll end up creating like a cool new character or really a little gem of a sketch that sort of like a kernel for an idea that I can come back to later on. I may have drawn a weird character here today that maybe 5 years from now I might look back through my sketchbook and go, hey, you know, that's a pretty good idea. I think I could do something with that. Okay, now we're going to get started here drawing a page. And the first thing I do is I take the script from Danny and read it over and start making some notes to myself. I had to go out and do a little research via the internet to look for some reference on an ancient Japanese city and some cool looking Japanese masks. Now the first thing I do when I get a script is I get some scrap paper and I start immediately jotting down the ideas that come to mind, the visual ideas that start coming into mind. And at this point, I'm playing very fast and loose and just trying to get ideas down. And then once I get my idea down in a little thumbnail, I can start playing around with it, deciding camera angles and deciding how many panels to break things up, deciding where the sound effects, type, things like that. I'm just sort of trying to get an idea for compositions and storytelling at this point. This is the most crucial point of any work in a comic, is doing the thumbnails and the layouts, because everything else is going to hang on this. This is sort of like building a house. This is the foundation of which everything else is going to hang on. After my first little set of thumbnails, I did another set, which was a little bit more specific, taking into account the placement of the title, and also starting to take a little bit more care in what is actually going to be shown. Now I deviated a little bit from what Danny had originally written, and this probably stems from the fact that the last several years I've done a lot of storyboarding for various cartoon shows, and so I'm thinking probably a lot more cinematic. So I thought I would start with an opening shot of the city or the castle, cut inside to a nice ornate room, and then as the character jumps in time, we would see a flash backlighting the screen, and then we would cut inside to see one of the masks that she's come to steal, pull back a little bit more to start to reveal the character, but still keep her in shadow, and then a frontal shot still mostly in shadow, and some of the mask that she's going to steal. And here you can see I'm thinking of various ways I could stage her reaching for the mask, some ideas from some of the research I did on the masks. But I wasn't quite happy exactly with this. But I decided from that to go to a much larger layout. And often when I'm working on a page, this is the size I do my official layouts at, which is the printed size of a finished comic book page. What I do is I take the blue pencil and go in and start roughing in all the shapes, getting everything broken down, establish my panel borders. And then from this point, I might actually go over and take a marker, and I might start going in for the purposes of the layout. I might start tightening this up a little bit. I don't do this always, but most of the time, this is the way I would proceed. So I would go in. Again, I'm keeping things fairly loose, just tight enough so that I can go to the next step. One of the things I try to do when working is always keep every step very open and loose so that I don't feel like I'm just repeating the same thing over and over. I like to keep the process open so that at any point I'm free to be able to go in and change something if I want. And I like to do a lot of the finished drawing actually when I do the final inking stage, and I use keep the pencils a little bit looser because I like the energy that I'm able to get in the inking stage by doing that. So again, to reiterate, this stage, the layout stage, is the most important stage. It's the blueprint for the rest of the comic, the rest of the way the page is going to be structured. And in here, you're dealing with composition, timing. By timing, I mean how many panels are on the page, how much detail is in the panel. The more detail, the slower the reader is going to read the panel. So the best thing to do is to take the most care at this stage. Here you can see I indicated the vanishing point for the perspective. All of that stuff you're doing at this stage to make sure that everything is clearly laid out. But in the end, I actually was not satisfied with the way this page was turning out. And after talking with Danny, I decided to go for something a little bit more dramatic. So what I did was do a quick new thumbnail of the same page. And here what I did was I still decided to have an opening shot of the city to show where everything was starting, then a shot of our heroine reaching for one of the masks. You get to see her costume very clearly. This is the splash page. The splash page is always the grabber, is always the page where you're trying to really pull in the viewer and reader and get them hooked. And when you usually see your character for the first time, the first full shot, you really want to get a good shot of the character so you can see what their costume is like and, what they look like, how big they are, how, what kind of character they are, if they're a man or a woman or a monster. And then I have another thinner panel here of her reaching for the mask. Initially, I had sort of had her looking at the masks here. But since we read from left to right, this would actually be reversing the action of the reader's eye. So I flopped the shot so that you're reading the way you would read, the direction you would read a comic, where you would turn the page. So from that, I stuck this on my lap board that I work at, and I proceeded to rough this page out very quickly in pencil. I used a very hard pencil when I was roughing it out. I used a 5H pencil. And I did this actually very quickly because I wanted to be able to scan it in and send it to Danny as fast as possible, showing him how I had come up with a different solution to telling the story. So here you can see again that there are many solutions, many different paths of telling the same story. And my job as the artist is to sort of be like a movie director and decide how I want to tell the story, how I want to pace it, how many shots I want to use, how big the shots are going to be. Because unlike film, where everything is always the same size, in comics you can use the entire page. You can have a long shot or a thin shot or a wide shot. So now I'm going to start tightening up this page. Now, before we begin drawing anything, we'll start by going over some of the art supplies you'll use to draw a comic book page. Okay, now when we start laying out a page, you usually start using a non-photo or a color erase is a brand of colored pencil to start roughing out your pages. So you'll need to get yourself a non-photo or a light blue pencil for doing your rough sketching of your page. Now after you've roughed out your page in blue pencil, you're going to want to tighten up the page with a darker lead. So you're going to either use a lead holder or a mechanical pencil. Now a mechanical pencil holds a lead that comes in various hardness from 5 or 6H, which is very hard, to up to 6 or 7B, which is very soft. Each artist has a preference for how hard or soft they like their lead to be. I tend to like a slightly softer lead, which is a 2B to an H. This also is affected by the humidity of the air. So I always usually have the air conditioning running in my studio to keep the humidity down, which affects the surface of your paper. Less humidity means the surface of your drawing paper is a little bit harder. Now for also doing smaller or more intricate detailed pencils, you may want to use a mechanical lead holder, which also comes with lead that comes in various hardnesses, just like the larger lead that I showed you earlier. So again, a lot of this has to do with the preference of the artist. Some people like a bigger lead to do more broad and expressive drawing, and some people like a finer lead for doing a lot more detailed drawing. After you've penciled everything and your pages are done, you'll begin inking. So when you begin inking, the first thing you're going to do is to have to draw the panel borders of your page. And I usually use a Rotring or a rapidograph. I like to use the disposable ones because I don't have to refill them, and I use that along with a ruler to rule the borders of my panels. The most expensive piece of art supplies you will buy will be your brush, the most flexible of all your drawing instruments. Now a good Series 3 Sable, I'm holding a Winsor Newton right here, will cost you upwards of $20. But you can't beat it for the performance. And as an artist, you need to have very good supplies. So picking a brush is very important. You can also use a synthetic brush. The synthetic brushes in recent years have gotten much better. And this Lowell Cornell that I'm holding, a number 3, is also very good. It's not quite as flexible as a Sable, which is organic. The Sable is always the best. But if you're going on a budget, a good synthetic brush is a good bet. And you can try them out, usually try them out in the art supply store. They usually have a piece of paper and a little jar of water, and you can try playing around with it and see if you like the point. The best thing to do when you're buying art supplies is to try a couple different things and see what you like best, because each artist, again, has their own preference. Now, the next tool in your array that you will use is a pen with a steel nib. And again, your choice of pen will be based upon what you find comfortable as an artist. Some artists only use pen, some artists only use brush. I like to use a combination of both. Most artists in the comic book business today use the Hunt 102. It is a very flexible pen point. The Hunt 108 pen point is a little bit more flexible. So again, it just depends upon what you like to use. I also like to hunt eBay and look for old pen points online, and sometimes I'll come across a box of old, really hard steel pen points. Old pen points are the best because they have the best quality steel. This other pen point I'm holding here, a deleter pen point, you can get online. It's a Japanese pen point. All throughout Asia, there's a lot of cartoonists who are using the traditional pen points, so they still make these supplies, and there are a few online sources where you'll be able to find some of these Japanese drawing pens. Now, many people today, instead of using the steel pen point or the brush, tend to use markers. And markers have improved a lot over the last few years. Again, a lot of young cartoonists I meet tend to use the marker, and I use them more myself now. The main thing I will say about a marker is that you want to get one that is waterproof, because the worst thing in the world is to have a bit of water or something splash on your comic page and smear some nice little face you just spent a half hour drawing. The Pigmas are good. The Zig markers, those are very good too. Again, the best thing to do is to go to the art supply store, buy a few markers, and see which ones you find comfortable. What may work for me may not work for you. Next, what you're going to use is a kneaded eraser, which is made out of rubber. And it's very pliable, and you can use this for shaping little pieces to erase a little bit. Now, a kneaded eraser is better for erasing than a regular white eraser because it takes up less ink when you erase. And after you ink a page, you don't want to pull the ink back up. So using a kneaded eraser is the best type of eraser. And it's very pliable. Eventually they get dirty because they get full of graphite, so you just toss them away and you get a new one. So these are the best type of eraser to use for erasing your pages. One of the first things I do is go in and really nail down the panel borders using a triangle. As you can see, I've gone ahead and roughed in a place where the titles will go, which I will later add in Illustrator. So now I'm going to go ahead and start tightening up the page. And again, I'm tightening things up just enough so that when I go back later and ink things, I can still leave a little bit of the fun and excitement for the final ink stage. I was able to go on the internet. Here's again an example of taking the kneaded eraser, lightening up. It's great for that. Just going for sort of a
a general shape of the trees, and when I go back and do the final inking, I'll go in and add a lot of blacks here, solid black and interesting textures. Backgrounds are just as important as characters, because they actually are characters. They tell you the time of day, they can tell you the atmosphere, they tell you where you are, whether it's an alien planet or Main Street, USA. Backgrounds are really, really important. The better you are at drawing backgrounds, the better you are at convincing the reader that this action, these incredible stories or fantasies that you're drawing, are actually taking place in a real situation. Now, I'm not penciling this as tight as I would be if I were drawing it for another artist to do the inking stage. If that was the case, another person was going to finish the art and the inking besides myself, I would really go in and pencil everything very, very, very tight so that there would be no question at all about what I wanted on the page. Templates. A good set of circle or ellipse templates. And go in and indicate the moon there. And then take the lead holder, and using the side of the pencil, I can go in and start indicating to myself very loosely where I would want the blacks to be. Again, figuring the moon is here, the direction of the light is going to be shining. So actually most of this is going to be in shadow, except for the top of the roofs. So even though I'm going to black in most of this, except for where the tile roofs are catching the moonlight, it's still important to go in and draw the entire structure. One of the things you're always doing when you're cartooning, or as an artist in general, you're always interpreting from life, always abstracting things, idealizing things, simplifying things, down to sometimes very basic, iconic shapes. And drawing something simple is a lot harder than drawing something very complex. When you're drawing something simple, you're always having to decide how much of something I can take out and still have it end up reading. Again, thinking about how the light would fall, lighting the trees, catching some shadows on the leaves. This is where you can have a lot of fun when you're inking, is being able to go in and experiment and play around with various textures. We're going to have a lot of fun with the pen and the brush doing that. Okay, I think we're done with the first panel. One also has to spend a lot of time studying anatomy, obviously if you're drawing figures all the time. And it's always good, if you can, to spend as much time taking life drawing and drawing from the real human figure, especially when you're dealing with idealizing the human figure so much. Again, what I'm sort of doing here is I'm really concentrating on the silhouette of her body. I want a nice, clear gesture. And by clear, I mean that if I were to take this figure and fill it in solid black, you would still be able to tell exactly what she was doing. So that's always a good trick to have. If you're not sure if your drawing is reading well, make a copy of it and fill it in with a big marker. Fill it in all solid black. And if it reads well, then you've got a good clear drawing. Don't be afraid when you're drawing, if you need to get an angle on something, to flip the page around. Again, this is what helps working at a board. You're able to move the page in any direction you need to pull a line or to get an angle. I remember when I first started in the business, one of the things that Dick Giordano, who used to be the head editor at DC Comics, told me was that if you could draw faces and hands well, you would probably always be able to have a job drawing. Because that's one of the things, those are two of the things I should say, that are actually the hardest to draw. So, and he's right. They are very difficult. Can be very, very difficult to draw. But any drawing problem you're having, whether it's anatomy or drawing faces or hands, any drawing problem can be overcome through practice. Just like playing sports or playing music. Art gives back what you give to it. She's got her little high-tech ear, flashlight, visor, headset, so she can talk to her brother through the miracle of science fiction. And Danny and I figured that, like most adventure heroes, that Heather would probably adapt her costume depending upon the need and the location she was going to. It's also more interesting for me as an artist to be able to keep trying to come up with different costumes. So I sort of came up with this sort of action corset. And one of the things you must always keep in mind when you're drawing in pencil is that this is not the final stage of the art. This is sort of the halfway point. And everything here that I'm drawing, in the end, will have to be interpreted in ink. So keeping clarity, keeping things clear, is very important at this stage. All these lines I'm putting down, even if they're gray, for instance, like this up here, there's a lot of shades of gray in this, but eventually it'll only be black or white. So I'm going to have to decide as I ink this how I'm going to interpret this little bit of gray. Am I going to do a sort of a scrubby effect or halftone, something like that, with a brush, sort of a stipple effect? Or am I going to just fill it in all black with a big juicy brush? Okay. Sort of putting in some main lines there. I had a lot of fun sort of designing what this armor would look like. That's one of the benefits of the profession is getting design, all kinds of fun, cool stuff, cool costumes. I know a lot of people have fun designing costumes for their characters. To me, the main thing is it must, even if it looks cool or even looks weird, it should still always seem functional and plausible. It could actually could actually work. So when you're designing something, don't be afraid to surround yourself with the work of artists that you admire, and try to analyze what it is that you like about their work. And then you can try and apply some of that to your own work. And I decided that I would give her sort of these big mitt hands for this big rig that she's carrying here. Okay, I've sort of gone in and basically knocked in her figure pretty good here. And that's a good place to be able to go back through and just add a few little touches here or there. Just nail a few things. What I did is I went in already and sort of worked out the perspective. Now I kind of futzed the perspective a little bit here to kind of give it a slightly wide angle feel. Just even though we're doing sort of a straight on shot, I didn't want everything to become really too much, almost like a cross, very, very dead. So by just slightly angling the walls a little bit, it just adds just a little bit of a sort of a fisheye, a little Dutch angle to the stuff. Another thing to watch out for is tangents. And a tangent is an intersection of two lines. Like if this line was a little bit higher and it was touching that point, that would create a tangent. And what would happen is your eye would go right to that point. And so one of the things you want to do when you're designing your pages is to always try to make sure that you don't have tangents. You don't have this, for instance, this finger touching exactly where that eye is. You move the eye over a little bit. Things like that. A lot of younger artists' work I see is really full of tangents. And until you really become aware of it, it's really easy to have that happen. And so sometimes a real neat trick to avoid a tangent is to just stop a line just short of the figure. Now you don't have to stop every line that way, but like here I want to make sure that line is not touching her finger. I like to keep things loose, very energetic. I like energetic artwork. A drawing that may be a little funky in a few places, may be a little warbly or a little off, to me is much more interesting than a drawing that is photorealistic, that is trying to compete with the camera. the artist can never compete with the camera, and you really shouldn't try to. Okay, now I'm going to go through and basically do what I did in the panel above. I'm going to sort of lay in some blacks with the side of the pencil. This is just enough so that when I go start inking this, I know exactly where my blacks are going to go. Going back to my thumbnail briefly, I already knew that I wanted to have real sort of high contrast shots. And I also already knew that I basically wanted to have the castle in silhouette. So in this case, I make it a lot easier for myself when I get to this stage of penciling. One of the goals to try to do is, in the beginning, is to be pretty formulaic about your approach as far as doing thumbnails and doing layouts. You don't have to be formulaic in the way you do everything, but these are pretty tried and true techniques and approaches that really prevent you from having a big headache down the road. When I teach, one of the things I always stress to my students is to follow these simple rules. They really save you a lot of time and headache. The worst thing to do is to get to a point in a drawing where you really like something, but there's some area of the drawing that at the time you were doing it, you just didn't take the time to figure out. You just really didn't feel like taking that extra 5 minutes and applying the background or figuring out the perspective, and then end up ruining something or having to do a paste over or something like that, where maybe just 5 extra minutes of time could have solved the problem. It might be that I'm maybe a little bit more technical or procedural than some artists, but I've always worked this way. And as a teenager wanting to get into comics, I would voraciously read any source I could that would show any sort of technical way of how you actually, went about drawing a comic book page. So I would love it if I would read an article where would show pencils by somebody like Neil Adams, who I was a big fan of as a teenager, or another good one was Gil Kane, who had a very technical, very formulaic approach from the standpoint of always doing these very bold, strong little layouts, and then transferring his layouts, much like I had done, actually transferring those, blowing them up and tracing them off instead of doing what I'm doing here, where I'm drawing on the board, he would have a light table with the layout underneath, and then he would be able to draw on top of that. Don't be afraid to add a lot of black to your pages. It really adds a lot of strength and really helps things read. Maybe you might notice the way I'm holding the pencil here, and I'm holding it much like you would hold a piece of chalk or a charcoal stick if you were in like a figure drawing class. And what I'm doing is I'm using, in this case, my whole arm. You know, my wrist and my arm are all one. And it helps really when going in and filling in these big areas like this. It's very different than when I was going over and holding this pencil. And I was doing that really so I could go in, you know, and really pull out the lines for details. Again, a lot of this comes down to what works for you. But I like art that has boldness and detail, not just detail and not just bold. I think the contrast between the bold and the detail make the art a lot more interesting and appealing to the reader. Here, when I ink this, all right, this is all going to be black, including her leg. All right, but that will force your eye to create the shape of where her leg is. Now, I could take and leave a little rim light along the edge to cut through. And I haven't decided exactly yet. Again, I sort of leave some things for me to decide when I'm actually inking. And sometimes I might do something like leave the rim light and then Xerox the page down and look at it and then decide, well, you know, I don't really like that. I don't really need that. And I might go back in and fill it in. Again, this is a good way to fill blacks really quickly with the side of your pencil. Again, you don't have to press very hard, just hard enough to fill the area. So everything here is casting a shadow. You sort of have one pretty stark light source. Some here. And you can see as you move around on the page, it gets a little dirty. Put a piece of paper underneath your hand, and that will help. Okay, I'm gonna go in here, add some interesting kind of cool shadows. Now here, see, everything is still gray. And then I had to decide, do I want to add too much shadow on her figure, which I don't think I really want to do. I could add like just a hint in her visor there, but I think I'll keep her kind of open. Another trick I might do, since I can have the option to bleed the panel borders, in other words, the art will print to the edge of the page, I can fill these panel borders black. And that actually helps with night scenes and things like that. That helps pop pages out. Real cool graphics. So, and X, often you'll see people's penciled pages, and you'll see a lot of these X's, and I would get people asking me, what does that X mean? And usually X just means that you want to fill that in black. Cast shadow from her figure. It's wrapping around, planes of the wall. Could actually have it going over. This is a Sanford color erase pencil that I'm using here, and this is the pencil that just about every animator, illustrator, and cartoonist I know is the brand that they use. It's great because it's really easy to erase, goes down very nice. Well, that about finishes everything up, I think, for this page. The next stage for me will be to scan this in and send a copy off to Danny as a JPEG. And then what I will do is to begin the inking process. First thing I will do is outline the panel borders, and then I'll just dig right in with the pen and brush. We're going to begin inking page number 1, and I've already gone ahead, save a little time, and I already pre-ruled the panel borders with the Rotring. So let's get to inking. Adjust my light here a little bit. Now, usually when I begin inking, if I've been drawing all day, sometimes I kind of like to warm up a little bit. So I'll sort of start out by doing some ruling lines. And that's fine. It just kind of helps get you into the rhythm of things a little bit. You have to keep shaking these so you make sure that the ink flows to the tip. Now I have a triangle that has a slightly beveled edge, and that's great because the ink won't go underneath and get trapped. If you ink with it flat, with the bevel edge up, the ink would get sucked underneath and it'll spread underneath your the triangle and smear on your page. So I'm going to keep inking in these backgrounds really quickly with the Rotring. I kind of go through and do all the non-organic lines. Another little trick I'm doing sometimes, even if I'm using a ruler and a rapidograph, I can kind of wiggle or slightly adjust the angle of it, and it will give me a slightly organic line, not a perfectly straight line. You don't want every line to be perfectly straight. If every line is perfectly straight, what happens is everything sort of gets a very frozen look. And here I'm going to ink this line freehand. One of the things you do when you're inking, if you want to ink a long line, is imagine that you have broken your arm and you have a cast. so you can't bend your wrist. And you can only pivot from your elbow. So if you want to ink a long line, you just ink, just pivoting your elbow. Now see, I did a nice sort of organic line there, which matches the other line there. The main thing you want to do when you're inking is make things read graphically. Separate the foreground elements from the middle ground elements from the background elements. In other words, this figure is in the foreground, this screen is in the background. One of your jobs as an inker is to make the separation of the planes, the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, and to not lose any of the drawing that's there in the pencils. I am running all the lines through here because this is all going to be solid black. So I'm not worried about if a line runs into her figure. All this is going to be solid black. Now here, again, I'm inking these signs, and I'm still going to go and actually put in some actual Japanese kanji. I can actually do that later on in Photoshop. And as I ink, I might turn a page, spin it as I need to be able to pull a line. It's easier to ink curves coming, little small curves coming towards you, and easier to ink long lines going away from you. So and if you make a mistake, or you go outside of a line, or you smudge something, that's no problem. You can always go back later and take your white out or your correction pen, or even just correct it in Photoshop. And just dip it in. You don't want to dip your pen down too deep. So this is the Hunt 102 pen point, and it's a little stiffer, but it is also flexible. You can get a nice big thin to thick line out of it. So what I'm doing is I'm really making an impression of a tree. Since I'm not drawing a real tree or real bushes, I'm drawing or inking impressions of what a bush is. So what I'm trying to do is imagine if you were looking at a high contrast photograph where you don't have any middle tones. You either have black or white, and then you get those really cool, interesting patterns on things. Now usually when I'm inking, I ink on more than one page at a time. And the reason for that is because now at this point, this page has a lot of ink on it that's fairly wet. I have to hold it up to the light and look and see if I can see a reflection, if it's a little shiny. Now vary your line weights. By doing that, you add a lot of sparkle to the drawing. You don't want all your line weights to be the same weight. It will really kill the drawing. It makes it boring. Sort of a snap to it. Again, the best way really to learn how to master any drawing instrument or inking instrument is to actually draw with it. Do a lot of freehand drawing with a pen or a brush. And you would be surprised if you're really diligent, in a couple months, even in a couple weeks, you can start to get really a big improvement in your skill. Don't be afraid. That's the main thing. You can't be afraid to ink. You can't be afraid to make the lines. You can't be afraid to make a mistake. You have to master your instrument. You can't let the instrument or the tool master you. And the only way that can not happen is if you're not afraid, and you can only get over that fear through practice. Now, I like to hold the pen a little bit further back, right about here. I find that gives me a better character to my line. I notice sometimes I'll see people will hold it really close to the tip, but I think if you hold it back here, you get a better line out of it. Again, the best thing to do is to get yourself a pen, some brushes, and just go to town. Just experiment, just have fun, practice. It's getting a little bit wet. I can sort of angle my board here and I can see that's kind of wet up there, so I don't really want to smear anything. So again, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to move down. I'm going to let that dry, and I'll just move down and start working on this panel below. See? Oh, see, now there you go. That's a case where there's a little bit too much ink on there. So like a surgeon, I'm going to take this brush, just stick it right in there, and absorb the extra ink into the tip. There's that. It happens with your brush, with your pen sometimes. It'll just get a little extra ink in it and it'll just blob up on you. Again, because it's been a fairly humid day here in Philadelphia, that humidity is affecting, even with the air conditioner on, it is affecting the quality of the tools here, or the ink I should say. So here I'll actually show you a little brush inking. And again, I'm holding my, when I want to pull a long line, I just sort of, again, pretend like my arm is in a cast, and so I keep my wrist locked, and that allows me to get a very nice, clean line. Still pretty wet. Now, in this case here, I'm not really changing much from what I penciled, because I actually penciled this very tight because I was doing a demonstration, so I could really show you what a fully penciled page would look like. The inker always does some interpretation, no matter what, because you're always changing something that is essentially a gray drawing into either a black or a white drawing. So there's always interpretation there. It's not really that different if I'm inking a black and white comic or I'm inking a color comic. Because even if I'm inking a comic that's in color, the work has to work in black and white. You cannot rely upon the color to make something stronger or to read better or to have better drawing. If it's not there in the black and white, it's just not there. When I'm doing a line like this, I'm pressing down a little bit harder and then flicking. It's like flicking the pen so I can get a thin or a thick to thin line. It's like a controlled flick almost. Another little trick, and this really applies more to comic book style illustration, is that the line on top of a figure is usually a little thinner and the line on the bottom is usually a little thicker. And this is usually a way to indicate that there's usually a light source at the top and a shadow underneath. So it's just doesn't really apply to a lot of other forms of drawing, but in comics we're sort of developing a special language here. Now I could have inked that with an ellipse, like an ellipse template, but I decided to do it by freehand because I like the more organic quality. But you can buy ellipse templates like this, or you can buy entire sets that go from real small to real big. And if you're serious about inking or drawing, it's a good investment to buy yourself some ellipses or even circle templates and some French, what they call French curves or ship curves. And since this mask is made out of wood, I'm putting some little textures on it, little surface textures, so it looks like it's kind of old. It has a different texture than the slick steel. I've switched back to my trusty Rotring because I'm just sort of outlining some shapes that later I'm going to fill in with solid black anyway. And when I ink, I often switch back and forth. I'll work with the pen for a while and switch and work with the brush. I wanted to get these I'm using my circle template here to do both of the eyes, so this way I can make sure the eyes are exactly the same size. It's always good to have a circle template, and then I'll go ahead, since I already have it, and I'll go up here and I'll use that to do the moon. And there's little bumps on the bottom of this, which is great, which holds it up, so again you don't get the chance to get things smeared. Now here's an example of using French curves. Now since this does not have a ridge on the bottom, I have to make sure that I hold the angle, the point, slightly away from the edge, or else the ink will go underneath and I'll make a little mistake. I'll get a little blob. Okay, I think we're ready to rock and roll with the brush now. And I go in and start filling in the blacks. Now this is very controlled because I have a nice sharp tip on the brush. And here I'm just going through and sort of trying to indicate roughly the kind of pattern you'd see of the light falling on a tree at night, where you're not going to see a lot of detail. You're just going to see impressions of detail. You just see shapes. And when this is reduced, it'll really sort of give you the impression that you're looking at trees in shadow. Okay, that panel is really almost done. I'm going to go back, take my Rotring, Rapidoliner, and just go back and crisp up a few little shapes here. Not a lot, just a little bit. Still want this to be sort of very impressionistic. Because it's at night. See, when you start adding the black on the page, things really start to pop. If I rub my brush, the rag, and take out some of the ink, I can get a nice sort of dry brush effect. You know, I may leave this white line here, and I may take it out. I won't really make that decision until later. I might leave it in because I want to have the rim light there, or I may just black it out because I don't really need it. Again, I sort of play things by ear sometimes as I go along. I would say on the average it takes about, well, this is me, I would say it takes anywhere from 2 to 5 hours to pencil a page, and usually roughly the same time to ink it. I think that's it. And I'll just take my kneaded eraser, knead it up a little bit. You can already see where it's starting to get a little dirty from use. And then I'll just go over and erase the pencils. And as soon as I'm done with this, I'll give it a once over, see if there's any little thing I need to touch up. And then it's off to scan it into Photoshop and to color.
Okay, now we're going to have some fun coloring. I've already gone ahead and scanned in my page into Photoshop, so let's begin coloring. The first thing I'm going to do is go through and clean it up. So I start by enlarging it. This is what I do. I go around and I clean up all my borders and any little mistakes, any little areas I missed. Okay, now that that is saved, the next step for me is to take the image size to 300, and I don't need the page at full size anymore, so I'll take it down to 11 inches, which is a little bit bigger than actual comic book size. Okay, now the next step is for me to select the entire image and paste it in as a layer. So now I have 2 layers. And I take the top layer. The way I color things is almost like an animation cell. This top layer I'm now going to eliminate all the white by selecting similar, and then I delete that. Okay, so now I can go and color on the bottom layer, and the top layer, it's like an animation cell. I can see through. So now I will convert this to CMYK. I do not want to flatten it. And I will select sort of a nice bluish color here. I can just go right in and darken things. Now first what I'm going to do is enlarge this a little bit, so going a little bit closer. There's going to be a lot of little holes, so little holes around here.
So I can't quite just hit it with a paint bucket. I'm going to have to go in and first we should be able to now go to the paint bucket and to be able to fill this in. I'm working really fast now just to block in colors. I can go back and tweak the colors later if I want, but I'm just trying to get things to a point where I can start going in and trying to separate the levels. I want to go in and separate, pull the trees in front of the wall, and in general, warm colors tend to come forward and cool colors tend to recede. To hit this little area here real quick. That's flesh. I'm just going to go in and block in some real basic colors right now. And then I'll come back and finesse this stuff later. But when I start coloring, I just start sort of, whoops. See, there's a little hole there. And the hair. Right now. And the coloring is in there to support the support of the art. I shouldn't be trying to fight the art or fight what I've already put down. I should be trying to support what I've already done. Now you can see if I turn off the layer that has the line art on it, sort of the cell layer, then you can see, if I blow this up, sort of like a cartoon cell. Turn that back on, you can see a lot of the detail. There's still a lot of little areas up in here that I'll have to go back in and fill in as I go along. Go back to my swatches. I'm going to choose a nice blue and a white. And I'm going to go and choose my gradient tool. And I'm going to set this to darken about 70%. And now I'm going to go ahead and fill that. Now see, that already gives it kind of a cool midnight looking tone. And sometimes I'll have to do this a few times to see if I get it exactly where I want. Now see, it sort of pops that so that it looks like it's dark in the room. You get that darker on one side and lighter on the other side. This is sort of akin to doing a filter, like if you were shooting a movie. Well, it might be a little bit too dark, so again, there, that works better. Ah, much better. So now I'll select that. These are the areas that I've gone through and selected. And so I will do the same thing here. Again, this is a case where you might end up having to go in in and out, in and out, in and out. Okay, this is coming along very nicely here, and I'm very satisfied that I'm going to be able to finish this and really have Heather pop out from the background here. I'm going to add a little bit more detail here or there, little shadows, do little tweaks, just little things to help pop the character forward, finish coloring little parts of her costume. But right now I'm going to go up and show you how I'm going to do the glow on the moon. So the first thing I'm going to do, because the moon's kind of just plain looking there, it's kind of flat. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into the layers and create a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Moon Glow. Okay. Select white, then I'm going to go up to my brushes. I'm going to select a very large brush. Maybe even a little larger than that, say 50 pixels or so. Okay. I'm going to drop the opacity down to about, we'll start at 50%. And then I'm going to go around the moon. Just to give it a little bit of a glow. Don't want to overdo it too much, but alright, now this I am now coloring. If I turn that layer off, see the moon below is still fine. So I usually do all my glows or any sort of effects like that, glowing effect, on a separate layer. And now the moon has a nice glow around it. So I'm going to continue on here for just a few more minutes, going in and tweaking. Again, pulling some of the highlights back out on Heather's figure here, but for right now, I'm going to save this. And I'm about 85%, almost 90% done with the coloring on this page. Okay, now we're going to start lettering. I have the script from Danny that has all the dialogue, so I've opened up the page in Adobe Illustrator, and now I'm going to start adding the lettering. I create a layer which will contain the lettering, and I name it Letters. Following that, I take the faxed balloon placement from Danny and go through the page quickly, roughly placing in the balloons. The next step is for me to go and open up the script that Danny sent to me as a Microsoft Word file. Once that's open, I can see that all the dialogue and captions are numbered. Then I take the faxed page layout with the balloon indications that Danny faxed to me. The numbers indicate which balloon matches the dialogue or caption that Danny indicated. While lettering, I keep referring back to these faxed layouts for balloon placement to make sure that I don't have the wrong person saying the wrong dialogue or have the wrong caption box in the wrong place. While I was doing the penciling and inking, Danny was busy doing the script and the word balloon placements. When I was done with the art, I had everything ready for me to go ahead and proceed to do the lettering. Next, I add the caption boxes the same way that I did the balloons. Then, selecting the color in the fill window, I change the color to yellow by using the CMYK sliders. I can make the word balloons or dialog boxes any color I want by adjusting the CMYK sliders. Then I go back into Microsoft Word and select the type. I go back into Illustrator and using the type tool, paste the type into the word balloon. The font I'm using is Astro City. I have it set at 7-point with 8-point leading. I can change the size of the font itself, or the leading in the character menu. After I get the font the size I want, I can adjust the balloon placement. Sometimes this takes a bit of finesse so I don't cover the top of somebody's head or crop a hand or crop something important in the background that the reader should be able to see. To center the lines of dialogue, go into the character menu and select Paragraph. Then select the type, then select the centered option. Next, you can manually center the type inside the dialog box or word balloon and adjust either to fit around the type nicely. Now working back and forth between
Microsoft Word, and Illustrator, I've gone through the rest of the page and have added all the type. I have a few balloons that I want to group into one shape, so I select the first balloon that I want to group together, and holding down the Shift key, I select the second balloon. Then, in the Pathfinder menu, I select the first option in the Shapes mode. This merges the two balloons into one shape. This is great for when you want to have an irregular shaped balloon to wrap around some type. To clip the end or trim a balloon where you want it to be even or flush with a border, again you go to the Tool menu. Select the square in the Tool menu and create a box over the portion of the balloon you wish to trim away. Then, again holding down the Shift key, click on the balloon, and now you will have joined both the balloon and the box. You have to make sure that the box was selected first before you select the balloon. Again, going back into the Pathfinder menu, select the second window in the Shapes mode. This cuts away the part of the balloon you do not want. Now to draw the tails on your balloons, you go to the Tool menu and you select the Precise Pen tool. Then you draw the tail of your balloon. Then you can merge the balloon and the tail just like you merged the balloons before. You select the tail, and then holding down the Shift key, select the balloon. Then, going back into the Pathfinder menu, merge them into one shape. Remember that the tail of the balloon has to be selected before you hold down the Shift key to select the balloon. Now you can also draw the tails on your balloons using the pencil tool. Then, following the same steps as before, select both the tail and then the balloon, and then merge them together in the Pathfinder menu. By using the pencil tool, you can draw more organic shapes or unusual shapes for your balloon tails. Once the page is done, I go through it one more time for a review. At that point, I might slightly adjust a word balloon or slightly move a tail. One thing that is vitally important is to save each step along the way. I save the work after each balloon is done. This way, if the program crashes, which they always do, I don't lose a lot of work and have to start over. I also do my sound effects by hand, but that's just my personal taste. If you want to use Illustrator to do your sound effects, hey, great, go ahead. In the end, all that matters is the style that you're going for. You can adjust balloons, create funky balloon shapes, or come up even with your own hand lettering and create a font. All of that's up to you. None of these computer programs will ever be able to replace the skill of a good hand letterer. The program is only as good as the person that's using it, so I suggest that you go to the library or the art supply store and get some books on lettering and calligraphy and start to study and learn about letter forms and the art of calligraphy. Comic book lettering is part of the art, so it needs to have just as much skill and care taken with it as you do with any other part of the process. Okay, thanks for stopping by. That about wraps it up. I'd like to thank my fellow collaborator, Danny Fingeroff, for stopping by, and I hope that this has given you, the viewer, a little window into our world on creativity. Now, we've had to condense this process down from a couple of days, which it would take to create all of these comic book pages that you will be able to see on the bonus section, into just a very few short minutes. So don't get frustrated if it takes you longer than 15 or 20 minutes to draw a page. It may take you a couple hours. It may take you a little while to learn how to master a pen or a brush, but I hope that you'll be able to take the lessons that I've shown you here on the DVD and be able to go out and apply that and be able to create your own comic book pages. Now, you'll be able to find more information on the bonus section of this DVD, where you will be able to see the rest of the pages from the Thief of Time story in all the various stages, from layout to pencil to ink to color, and including lettering. So you can find out more, if you're interested, about various stages of drawing and writing every month in either Right Now, the magazine put out by Danny, or Draw Magazine, which is put out by me. And you should also be able to stay in touch with the latest news and get some more online tutorials on the Draw Magazine website. So thanks for coming, and I hope I see you next time.